We do agree China's oil demand will peak around year 2028 in our forecast. In fact, we think the gasoline demand has already peaked in year 2023, but the growing petrochemical and jet fuel demand still drives the overall peak a bit later. We believe India will be the fastest growing oil demand region among the large economies globally. In fact, we think roughly a third of the global oil demand growth over the next 10 years will be coming from India. And this is despite the initial strides they've made in electrification, especially two-wheelers that account for 50% of the gasoline consumption in India. And they've also made major progress in the ethanol and the biofuel blending. Even then, we believe the oil demand will be growing in India because of income growth, rising manufacturing. In fact, when we observe the data around the developed market, oil consumption to GDP per capita, we believe at a certain level, with higher income growth, there is an acceleration in the oil demand growth period. We believe India is starting on that phase now.
So how likely is it, and what timeline do you have in mind for India to structurally displace oil? Perhaps not natural gas and LNG, but oil. I mean, especially if Modi has this pledge, 30% EV penetration by the year 2030. Is 2030 the tipping point?
So when I said India will be the fastest growing oil demand region globally among the large economies, I mean it for this decade as well as next decade. Even though, as I mentioned, electrification is rising, we believe from a low single-digit EV penetration in the passenger cars, we'll move to about 23% EV penetration by 2030 for the passenger car. There'll be a faster development on the two-wheeler side. So let me elaborate on this income growth aspect, which is what matters here in a continuous drive in the oil demand growth. It is commonly assumed that every dollar increase in GDP leads to a fixed level of oil demand growth. But when we look at the last 3-4 decades of the developed markets, oil consumption per capita, we note at a certain level of, when we hit a certain level of income growth, there is a faster acceleration in oil demand. For example, when India is growing from $1,000 GDP per capita to $2,500 now, during this period, we are maximizing consumption of staples, protein, basic metal. But as we go fast from here, wealth accumulation happens. We consume more white goods, appliances. These are made of petrochemical, which is made of oil. We get more wealthier. Our fleet of car penetration broadly rise. We get more wealthier. We consume more oil for jet fuel demand. So again, we believe India is at that inflection point where next 10 years, we are seeing the development of the S-curve pattern in their oil consumption per capita versus GDP per capita. And that is why the growth will continue in the next decade as well.
So suffice to say, India is going to continue to be a formidable force in the global oil market for at least the next 2 decades or so. From a demand point of view, Nikhil, how supportive for India are oil prices at the current levels in the low to mid-60s?
Yeah, sure. I think the current level of oil pricing is quite affordable at the gas stations level. Even at the current gas station prices, the margins of the marketing companies are higher than average. So at some point, if these prices are passed on to the end consumers, I think there is headroom for prices to come down. Overall, from the other standpoint, for example, the EV car versus the ICE car standpoint, we believe at $60 per barrel oil, the total cost of ownership argument for ICE, the combustion engine, to stay competitive with the EV car is still about 2 years to 3 years away. So again, lower oil price helps to push out the TCO, total cost of ownership argument on EVs, which is still not there yet. And at the same time, at the gas station level, I think there is headroom for the price to come down. Overall, our view is next couple of years we are going to be around this level of oil price because we have a large OPEC spare capacity which is gradually getting released in the market. And 2025 and 26 is a strong year of non-OPEC supply growth as well. So there is enough oil in the market. Oil prices are likely to be under control. And at this level of oil price, I think the affordability is less of a concern for the...
It's interesting, and this is when it gets political, doesn't it? Because India has purchase agreements for crude oil from Russia, from Venezuela, and India seems to be relatively agnostic or non-aligned in terms of its energy policy. Is that going to be a factor that's going to get them into trouble with the United States or other powers?
Look, I think it's an interesting question. But again, what I can say is At one point, India's oil imports, 9% of that was coming from US in 2021. That number was 5% last year.
Yes.
I think there is a clear intent shown to increase the energy imports from the US corridor, and that's not just for oil. As I said previously, we've been as high as 9%, but the same applies for gas as well. India's LNG imports have been largely flat in the last 5 years, and we think these LNG imports will also double by 2030. So even in the case of gas, there is room to increase the imports and diversify the sourcing, including into the US market, where there is a wall of new LNG supply coming out.
And I wonder if that's going to be, that commitment is going to be formalised as we move closer to a US-India trade deal. I've been hearing that energy is going to be a central component of that, more commitment to buy US LNG, possibly next-generation nuclear technology. How is that going to change the landscape?
Look, I think when you think about the broader India's energy mix, I think nuclear will also be an important aspect in the longer term, but that's still quite long term. So India,
and you're hitching that to the AI cloud center, data center build out.
Well, not just that. I think it's just the air conditioner and just the broader rise of power demand in the country. As I talked about,
need to be on the table. Yeah.
Absolutely. As I talked about oil demand, we're going to see a similar acceleration of S curve in the power sector and in the power demand. And we haven't added a lot of thermal coal capacity in the past 8 to 9 years. We're adding more renewables, which are not fully round the clock. And India is still not self-sufficient on batteries as well to make the renewables round the clock. So again, India will need to look for more round-the-clock solutions longer term. Coal is one aspect where government has revised up the capacity targets for 2032. Nuclear is where the government has talked about 100 gigawatt targets by 2047. But again, nuclear plants take longer, even longer than coal. So this is a solution for next decade. If we start planning now for nuclear, I think it can still take more than 5 years. But again, we need all options on the table. We are growing renewables fast, but we also need coal. We also need nuclear.
It's interesting how active Prime Minister Modi has been in terms of spearheading this global biofuel alliance. And I understand that he has a number of very important countries, including Brazil, that have pioneered this technology as commitments. How much leadership broadly do you think that we are seeing from India in terms of really scaling renewable energy?
Yeah, sure. So there are a couple of aspects of the renewables. One is, as you mentioned, the biofuel, and India has achieved their ethanol blending target of 20% ahead of time.
Right.
In fact, there are reports about pushing that targets towards 25% as well, and that's utilizing the agriculture feedstock, the agriculture residue, the sugarcane, the maize, etc., to produce more oil equivalent fuel. India is also going big on the biomass, where they've gone towards 10 gigawatt capacity already to generate power from biomass, and there are ambitious targets there as well. But I guess the biggest piece here, which is an attempt to improve the self-sufficiency, is the renewables bit. India has become a net exporter of solar modules now. They're not only self-sufficient on modules, and they're gradually becoming self-sufficient on cell, but they become an exporter on the module. There are still some bottlenecks there. We don't have enough polysilicon production locally. We still import that. We don't have enough batteries right now because gradually companies are building the expertise to manufacture batteries. So there are some bottlenecks in fully scaling up around-the-clock renewable, but it is clearly an important solution. So we believe, as I mentioned earlier, all the energy options need to be on the table. Renewable, they're going very aggressive. 450 gigawatt power capacity. We're already 200 gigawatt renewable plus hydro within that. But not everything is round the clock, and our power demand is also growing. So we still need thermal. We still need nuclear from that standpoint.
Energy has, in India, and is no exception, it's been such a sensitive consumer issue and so politicized as well. For India, it can't completely expose the consumer to the vagaries of the international market. So you would assume that there has to be a certain degree of subsidy protection. Is the government getting that balance and the framework right?
Interesting question, Sri. Firstly, we are in a lower tape environment for oil and gas in the medium term. We do have enough OPEC and non-OPEC spare capacity in the system for oil, and we have a wave of LNG supply coming, not just from US, but also Qatar, Australia. So we believe we're going to be in a gas downturn starting 26 or 27, for a period of as much as up to 5 years.
Good news for the consumer.
Exactly. So I think the energy prices are under control. The supply demand is supportive for India to consume more without the affordability issues and take an example at the gas station level of prices, right? At the current gas station prices of petrol and diesel, I think there is enough at 60 to 65 oil. There is buffer for the marketing companies to maybe further pass it on to the end consumer at some point, right? So we think we're in a lower oil and gas tape, so the level of incremental subsidy required will not be higher than where we are today.
And last month, Prime Minister Modi was very actively visiting the Middle East, visiting the region, and really consolidating that relationship with Saudi. There's also an India-Oman trade deal now. How does that safeguard and really create more sustainability in terms of India's optionality when it comes to energy security?
Yeah, look, I think given the rising period of energy demand growth, we need all the options on the table, and diversification of the energy sourcing will be important. We are looking at oil import dependency to still rise in the medium to long term for the next 5 to 10 years, because the oil production is largely flat. Our oil fields are relatively mature. Even the government is making a lot of effort to improve, bring in reforms on the oil production side and the gas production side. But oil and gas production is still likely to be more flattish in the medium to longer term, and our demand is growing. So we will need more energy, and it is important to have the diversification of that energy mix. So that's the context I can see, whether it's Middle East, whether it's US, whether it's Russia and the other regions, but our energy demand is growing quite rapidly. So there needs to be more diversification of the energy sourcing from a long-term standpoint.